For centuries, we have been completely obsessed with the mystical civilization of Atlantis, a place full of treasures and wealth and lost technology. But we have to ask ourselves, was this story even real? Or is it just another myth that got out of hand? Today we're going to find out. It's really no coincidence that Atlantis have fascinated people for so long. Some say that our own civilization can be traced back to Atlantis. But where does this story actually come from? Atlantis is not one of those stories that is completely all over the place. The story of Atlantis comes to us from one very specific source, and that is from the Greek philosopher Plato. Around the year 360 BC, in two of his writings, Critias and Timaeus, Plato describes a powerful island nation, a place of fertile land, magnificent cities, and great technological advancements. But according to Plato, Atlantis wasn't just any island. It was a vast empire made up of 10 individual kingdoms, with the capital city of Atlantis being located beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And the Pillars of Hercules are what we know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. But it is worth mentioning that this was not always the case. We only know the Strait of Gibraltar as the Pillars of Hercules after the Roman Empire. Before the Roman Empire, so while Plato was alive, the Strait of Gibraltar could have meant a whole lot of different locations. This is what Plato tells us about how this magnificent kingdom simply vanished. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea. There is a lot of debate of whether Plato was just trying to make a political point about his city, Athens, where he lived, or if he was actually recollecting something that at least he believed was actually true. But the story tells us that Plato actually got this information from his ancestor Solon. Solon was an Athenian lawmaker who in 600 BC traveled to the land of Egypt, and he met some priests in the Temple of Neith, located in the city of Sais, which is unfortunately no longer around. Some parts of the city and temple are still there, but they have severely decayed over time. In this temple, these priests actually told Solon a story about a great civilization that existed 9,000 years prior, and then it was simply wiped off the map. Plato's description of Atlantis suggests that it was a massive island, larger than both Libya and Asia Minor combined, overflowing with natural resources. It was especially rich in metals, including one very mysterious material, orichalcum, a metal that even today remains a mystery, and that this particular mineral was valued only second to gold, which will be a very important point later in the video. At the heart of Atlantis, on the southern coast of the island, stood a city unlike any other. It was connected to the sea by a massive canal, and its layout was nothing short of bizarre. 3 perfectly circular rings of land separated by moats, all leading to a central island. The inner citadel was 5 kilometers wide, but the whole thing stretched over 23 kilometers, making it twice the size of Imperial Rome. And right in the center, the palace of the kings and the great temple of Atlantis. According to Plato, the Atlanteans were so wealthy that their riches surpassed those of any ruler or king before or since, and if they didn't have something, they simply imported it from somewhere else. They were that wealthy. But despite all of its power, Atlantis was doomed. There are some that say that in an effort to dig deeper, Plato actually consulted students of Pythagoras, consulted with special brotherhoods, and even had special access to the Library of Alexandria, which may have contained some records of Atlantis. None of that is true. While it is true that Plato was heavily inspired and influenced by earlier thinkers like Pythagoras, there is absolutely no historical evidence that he saw the assistance of Pythagoras' students on this or any related topic. As for the Library of Alexandria, this was constructed after Plato's death, so this makes it literally impossible for Plato to have had access to the library in the first place. So the official source for all this is from Solon, who traveled to Egypt and got the information from the priests at the Temple of Neith. But we have to ask a very interesting question. Is any of this real? While Plato does give us some clues about where Atlantis might be located, he doesn't give an exact location. To figure that out, we have to turn to geology and oceanography. the study of how Earth's oceans have changed over time. Some theories suggest that Atlantis was a volcanic continent linked to Europe, Africa, and North America by temporary land bridges, with some believing that millions of years ago, a vast landmass stretched from the Appalachian Mountains to the southern tip of Africa. But over time, this broke apart, leaving behind two separate islands. Poseidonis, the larger of the two, may have even survived until the last ice age, when tectonic shifts and rising sea levels finally pulled it beneath the waves. Today, many believe the Azores Plateau and Madeira are the last remnants of Atlantis, the highest peaks of a once massive landmass that now sits deep below the Atlantic Ocean. If we could drain the ocean, what would we see? A massive underwater mountain range stretching thousands of miles, as long as the Andes and the Rockies combined, and just as tall as the Himalayas. During the Middle Ages, a lot of ancient knowledge was sadly forgotten, but during the Renaissance, scholars began rediscovering ancient knowledge. And over the past 500 years, theories have been completely wild about Atlantis, with some believing that right now it is still there under the Atlantic Ocean, and some believing that it never existed. But then, there's the third possibility, one that says that Atlantis might not be from this world. According to a man named Ishmael Peres, Atlantis was actually created by humanoid beings from a star system 440 light years away. These beings, he says, were capable of balancing science and spirituality in a way that no civilization ever has. But this idea isn't really new. Theosophists like Helena Blavatsky, a Russian mystic, claim that humanity evolves in 7 great cycles called root races, and according to her, Atlantis was the 4th root race, the first truly human civilization on Earth. And according to her, Atlantis existed as early as 8 million BC. According to esoteric tradition, higher spiritual entities assumed human form and incarnated on Earth at the dawn of the Atlantean period. So according to Helena Blavatsky, these were actually spirits that took on human form. Even some philosophers like Rudolf Steiner wrote that their homeland was not from Earth. The first period of Atlantean civilization gave way to a second and then a third, during which Atlantean civilization spread from its island homeland to other parts of the world. Each world age or period was separated from the previous one by natural disasters, the last of which was the final submersion of Atlantis, the story that we know from Solon from 9,000 years ago. These teachings by Blavatsky and others even offer physical descriptions of Atlanteans. They describe the 4th race as giants, believing that this gave rise to legends of Cyclops and Titans, which appear in many ancient traditions like Greek mythology. According to Blavatsky, the Atlanteans were the race that reached the pinnacle of physical development and even possessed the famous third eye. Over time, however, with the evolution of human structure, the increasing materialism and corruption of mankind, this third eye gradually disappeared. Now, all of these theories derive from many interpretations from oral traditions and ancient texts, and for a long while that was all that we had, until in 1901, a man saw Atlantis in a vision. The famous physician and healer Edgar Cayce started experiencing a severe loss of voice. His first recorded reading occurred on March 31st, 1901, when he was hypnotized and successfully diagnosed his own condition, which marked the beginning of his career as a psychic healer. Most of his insights about Atlantis refer to the last 20,000 years of its existence, but he also described its earliest stages of development. Cayce claimed that humanity emerged from 5 locations at once: the yellow race in the Gobi Desert, the white race in the Carpathians, the red race in Atlantis and the Americas, the brown race in the Andes, and the black race in Africa. This, he said, happened over 10.5 million years ago, and that these 5 races were the sons of God mentioned in the Bible. The daughters of men, with whom they mistakenly mated, were actually strange primitive beings, the result of early failed attempts at material projection. This union produced a hybrid race, and from the beginning of Atlantean civilization, there was a heavy division in how to actually treat them. The children of the Law of One sought to preserve the purity of the human race, yet also wished to help the hybrids reclaim their place as God's creatures. The sons of Belial, however, valued only pleasure and power, seeing the hybrids as mere slaves. According to Cayce, Atlantis was not destroyed just in one cataclysm. It was destroyed in 3 separate cataclysms. The first one was in 50,000 BC due to the misuse of advanced technology. The second one was in 28,000 BC, following violent conflict between the 2 factions. And the third and final one was in 10,000 BC, the final submersion of Atlantis, and the story that pretty much everybody knows. Before the last disaster, the children of the Law of One fled, migrating to places like Peru, Yucatan, Nevada, Colorado, and Egypt. This was the period when Egypt reached a high level of civilization, and according to Casey, the Sphinx and the pyramids were built. Another very wild theory about Atlantis comes to us from Matthias de Stefano, who claims to have remembered a past life in an Atlantean colony, which is now Egypt. According to de Stefano, Atlantis was built in 16,000 BC by the Aesir. This was a race of alien giants, also known as the Anunnaki. They established their civilization between the Azores, the Canary Islands, and Cape Verde. The Aesir came to the Earth in search of a new home and of valuable metals. They settled in the Middle East, where they experimented with human DNA, seeking to create an optimal life form on Earth. Their hybrid offspring, so the Atlanteans, became the chosen race from the Anunnaki, serving as the key for the Aesir's preservation and as the guardians of ancient knowledge. Over time, the Aesir split into two factions. One group enslaved humans, using them for labor and experimentation, and the other sought to educate and guide humanity. The benevolent Aesir rescued some of their descendants, allowing them to develop independently. From these, 12 children were chosen, each preserving a different piece of knowledge from a different star system. These 12 children later formed the 12 great families of Atlantis. Now, all of these theories can get very wild and very wacky, and to be honest, most of them I don't really take seriously. Edgar Cayce has a lot of detractors, which I won't get to in this video, same as Helena Blavatsky and others that put forward the more wild theories about Atlantis. But if we want to look at this on a more serious note, we can just go back to the basis. That Solon traveled to Egypt and got this information from the priests and the Temple of Neith, and this story has been passed down from generation to generation until it reached Plato, and that's the story that we know today. This period of 9,000 years before the time of Solon would be roughly 11,000 years ago today. This is especially interesting because it directly coincides with the period of the Earth called the Younger Dryas. Before and after the Younger Dryas, major meltwater pulse events took place that caused rapid sea level rises. The most significant one being Meltwater Pulse 1b, which took place between 11,100 and 11,600 years ago. And this is roughly the time that Solon describes. Now, this could be a complete coincidence, but no one can deny that it's very interesting that the only date that we have for the destruction of Atlantis directly coincides with a period of the Earth that we know to have been extremely cataclysmic. Furthermore, while a lot of locations have been proposed for the location of Atlantis, like the Azores, there is one very particular location that is very compelling. The Richard structure in Mauritania, also known as the Eye of the Sahara, looks awfully similar to the description of Atlantis from Plato. The capital city of Atlantis was described as having concentric circles of water and land and being rich in resources like gold. Interestingly, Mauritania has incredibly vast reserves of gold, which is one of the reasons why no one has been able to do major archaeological study at the Richard structure. And to really drive the point home of how much gold Mauritania actually has, the richest man in history, Mansa Musa from the Mali Empire, which was located in modern-day Mauritania, was the richest person ever to have walked on Earth. He had an estimated net worth of $500 billion in today's money, making him richer than even Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And at this point of the video, I just want to do a huge shout out to Jimmy Corsetti from the Bright Inside channel. If you really want to dig deeper into this whole Richard structure rabbit hole, look no further than his channel. All of his stuff on that topic is just absolutely amazing. So despite all the wild stories about Atlantis that are still out there, and claims about crystal technology and all that, the idea that a civilization prior to ours existed and were advanced enough to have knowledge of astronomy and cartography and architecture, and that this civilization was destroyed in a flood 11,600 years ago, is still very much a topic of debate. Another interesting point is that if you take a look at any civilization, everyone has a flood myth. So all of these myths and stories could have some bearing on reality, perhaps a warning that every civilization eventually has its end, and that by becoming arrogant and forgetting about exercising moderation and balance, we can accelerate that end. So I think it's time to take a look at all these ancient stories and realize that a lot of what they describe sounds an awful lot like us. Thank you so much for joining me for today's tale. If you had fun or learned anything new today, be sure to drop a like and subscribe to my channel, Also share this video with someone else and don't go away without watching one of these 2 videos right here. Until the next tale, farewell, and may the gods smile upon you.